All right. So I pull a lot of things out of my you-know-what on this show. Usually I'm right. And I checked with two renowned constitutional scholars yesterday afternoon to ask them about the honeypot, how 2024 is going to be a sting operation for Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, to arrest Donald Trump. If you remember on yesterday's show, I said that the Supreme Court's July 1st immunity ruling says an ex-president cannot be tried for crimes he committed in his official duties as a president. But Donald Trump is no longer president. He's no longer sitting in the Oval Office. He's merely an ex-president trying to get back into the Oval Office. And I spoke with two constitutional scholars, and I asked them, does the July 1st Supreme Court ruling give any immunity to Donald Trump for the crimes he's about to commit and is committing to interfere with the November 5th election? And I was told by both, well, nothing would surprise us with this Supreme Court. However, nothing from that July 1st ruling on immunity would protect Donald Trump from the crimes he's committing right now and will commit on November 5th and November 6th when he refuses to accept the results of his catastrophic, humiliating loss. More about that in the weeks to come. This is the mop-up for September 19th, 2024. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. And of course, the best way to help me out is to share these episodes. The only reason you ever found me is because somebody forwarded this show to you. We're doing a vice president debate watch party on October 1st. Good versus evil. We're going to watch Good versus Evil. I will fill you in on details in the days to come. Evil J.D. Vance first began telling the lie that Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, were stealing and eating pets on September 9th. That's when he began the lie. The claim immediately spread all over the internet with these anti-Haitian cat memes. The Wall Street Journal reports this morning that the city manager of Springfield, Ohio, within hours, contacted J.D. Vance's office and warned him, "You are spreading a lie that could prove damaging to our community. Please stop." But J.D. Vance ignored the message and encouraged his supporters to spread the lie about Haitian immigrants eating pets anyway. At one point, before Trump picked up on this during the debate, J.D. Vance told his supporters, "Don't worry whether this thing about Haitian immigrants is true. It's a fun meme, so let's make it viral." It's a fun meme, so let's make it viral. As I reported on yesterday's program, J.D. Vance finally buckled on Sunday with Dana Bash from CNN and admitted he knew it was a lie. He admitted he made up the story about Haitian immigrants stealing pets to eat them. He made up the story, he said, in order to draw attention to a larger problem. And what is the larger problem? Haitians. That's the problem. Now, out on the campaign trail, when told the Haitians living in Springfield are in this country legally and have documents, J.D. Vance said yesterday, "I don't care. As far as I'm concerned, they are still illegal aliens." And the crowd cheered. Republican governor of Ohio told the PBS on Wednesday that Ohio Senator J.D. Vance's false claims of Haitian immigrants living in Springfield, Ohio, eating cats and dogs are, quote, "hurtful, disruptive, dangerous, and must stop. The Ohio governor complained that since Vance first spread this lie and Donald Trump picked up on it during last Tuesday's debate, hospitals, schools, and government buildings have had to go into lockdown as the number of bomb and death threats increased. The governor has been forced to transfer more than 30 state troopers to Springfield, Ohio schools to patrol classrooms and sweep for explosives. Haitian immigrants in the city complain of constant physical and verbal threats. The Trump campaign, and, well, I would say this is incredible, but it's the Trump campaign. The Trump campaign responded to the Ohio governor's remarks, saying he's overreacting because every single one of those bomb threats, every single one of those death threats turned out to be a hoax, which they are. So the governor should just ignore the death threats, the bomb scares? Is that what Donald Trump is advising him to do so that Trump can stir up hatred for migrants? The Republican governor said the Haitians are all legal immigrants. He called them great workers and a boost to the Springfield, Ohio economy. But during his rally on Wednesday, J.D. Vance says, I don't care. He said, I don't care if the Haitian immigrants are in this country legally. J.D. Vance said, the reason they're legal is because Kamala Harris gave them the green light to come on in. She welcomed them. She gave them visas, work visas. So as far as I'm concerned, said Vance, these Haitians are illegal aliens. There are 850,000 Haitian immigrants here in America. Since 2010, we began accepting tens of thousands and gave them temporary protective status in response to that massive earthquake, several catastrophic hurricanes, gang violence, and of course, political upheaval. Haiti, according to the UN, has among the highest rates of starvation in the world. 1.4 million Haitians are on the brink of starvation. 4.3 million face extreme hunger, according to the UN. But they're coming to America. And according to J.D. Vance, as well as Trump, they're coming here to eat our pets, poison our blood, spread tuberculosis and HIV. Haiti sits 700 miles off the coast of Florida and shares an island with the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic, a top tourist destination for Europeans and Americans. Republicans choose to lie about the Haitians who are lucky enough to make it to America. These are all lies, race-baiting lies. Republicans have nothing but contempt for their voters and, of course, the American people. Lying is their business model. They think the American people will believe whatever they tell them to believe. And they're right. At least with all Republicans, they're right. Reagan, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump all got away with lowering taxes for the very wealthy with the big lie that the government can balance budgets, pay off debt by taking in less tax revenue. It makes no sense, right? And Donald Trump added $8 trillion to our national debt because of those tax cuts. 1/3 of our national debt when he left office was because of those tax cuts. But if the lie is outrageous enough and big enough and you repeat it often, some people, too many people, believe it. In Mein Kampf, wait, is that Stephen Miller? Trump's immigration czar to the right? Yes, that would be Stephen Miller. Did I do that? Yes, I did. That would be Stephen Miller sitting next to you-know-who. Anyway, in Mein Kampf, Hitler writes of the big lie. He said, the bigger the lie, the more convincing it becomes. It's counterintuitive. Hitler wrote that people will believe the unbelievable if it's big enough and repeated enough, because he said ordinary humans refuse to accept that anyone could have, quote, the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. What Hitler landed upon is humans, by our very nature, we're trusting souls. And we can't understand why anyone would say something so outrageous unless it was true. So most of us, or enough of us, believe these big lies, especially if we're predisposed to believing the big lie, if it preys on our racism. Humans want to believe horrible things about anyone from another perceived tribe. Dick Cheney and George W. Bush lied and said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and that he orchestrated 9/11. They tricked this entire country, or at least most of the entire country, as well as its military, into invading Iraq, even though Iraq had zero to do with 9/11 and possessed zero weapons of mass destruction. We know now that they knew there were no weapons of mass destruction, and they knew Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. But it was the big lie. Certainly after 9/11, no president could be so evil as to lead us into a war and destroy millions of innocent people who had nothing to do with 9/11. Certainly no president after 9/11, after how scared we were and broken, he wouldn't send our nation's treasure into harm's way based on a lie. 1 million innocent dead Iraqi civilians later, most Americans have either forgotten that big lie or forgiven that big lie because it's simply too horrible to admit that we were conned. Instead, some of us say, well, it was an honest mistake. It was a bungled quagmire, but with good intentions. You see, the big lie breeds even bigger lies to ourselves. The big lie, George W. Bush, and I'm sorry to say Barack Obama, spread the lie that Afghanistan attacked us on 9/11. Barack Obama ran for president back in 2008, accusing George W. Bush of taking his eye off the ball by invading Iraq and not focusing on the people, he said, who really attacked us on 9/11, Afghanistan, the Taliban. Now, I know this still remains too much for most Americans to handle. But the Taliban didn't have anything to do with 9/11. The Taliban were ruling over what, at the time, Bush called a failed state. Do you remember this? Some of you are old enough to remember when they referred to Afghanistan as a failed state. The Taliban controlled Kabul, but there were dozens of warlords around Afghanistan vying for control of the rest of that country. So we were told two things right after 9/11, two opposing, contrary ideas. Afghanistan is a failed state, and yet, despite being a failed state, it was able to orchestrate 9/11. The truth is, Al-Qaeda was up in the eastern mountains of Tora Bora in Afghanistan, and the Taliban had no control over bin Laden. The truth is, 9/11 was paid for by Saudi Arabian princes. Most of the hijackers were Saudi Arabian. Bin Laden got assistance from Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. If we were going to go to war, after 9/11 than we should have attacked our allies, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, our friends. Can't do that. So pick on the Taliban because they are an oppressive regime. They do oppress women, so they're easy to want to kill here in America as long as you don't know the facts. The Pakistani army was lousy and remains lousy with al-Qaeda sympathizers. Let me repeat. The Pakistani army next door to Afghanistan was lousy and remains lousy with al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden sympathizers. The madrasas, those were the schools funded by Saudi princes, those madrasas that taught extremist anti-American versions of Islam in the lead up to and immediately following 9/11, they were all in Pakistan. Pakistan was the breeding ground for al-Qaeda, as well as other terrorist groups, including the ones who blew up the London subway in 2005. It's why Osama bin Laden was killed by our CIA in Pakistan. In the lead up to 9/11, Osama bin Laden shuttled back and forth between the caves of eastern Afghanistan and Pakistan. He had little to no contact with the Taliban. He was funded and supported by Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Again, the Taliban, who we blame 9/11 on, they barely controlled Kabul, let alone Afghanistan, because Afghanistan was, as Bush said, a failed state. Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan. For 10 years after 9/11, he was kept safe by elements within the Pakistani military. The Pakistani doctor who worked with our CIA back in 2011 to track Osama bin Laden down, he did this by administering polio shots and collecting DNA. That doctor is now sitting in a Pakistani prison. He is considered a traitor for helping America find Osama bin Laden. But the big lie. Most Americans, if not all, still believe the Taliban, the people of Afghanistan, were behind 9/11, and that justified our more than 20-year decimation of that country. The big lie. Certainly, George W. Bush, British Prime Minister Tony Blair, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld, as Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf, certainly they wouldn't have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. The bigger the lie, the more credible it becomes. 2 wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, lies. And because I tell the truth, especially about Afghanistan, I'm often accused of not supporting our troops. By telling you that both wars were lies, I'm performing a disservice to our soldiers. People say, okay, David, I get Iraq was a lie, but Afghanistan, we know Afghanistan attacked us on 9/11. President Obama said so. So how can you say something like this, that the Taliban weren't behind 9/11 when so many of our soldiers died? I say that because so many of our soldiers died. I say that because so many civilians died. And for what? For what? I mean, other than profits. The American people have proven what Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf to be true. We will believe the big lies, especially when they're shrouded in a hint of racism. Now, so far in America, the big lies have generally been used to provide tax cuts for the richest and to fight unnecessary but profitable wars overseas for the richest, right? But Trump and J.D. Vance are using the big lie now the same way Hitler did, to attack the enemy within. This is a little different, more Hitlerian. Trump has repeatedly warned that the biggest threat to America isn't overseas. He says this all the time in his speeches. Trump says the biggest threat to America isn't overseas because he's an isolationist, right? He says the real threat is from within. He says that over and over. The real threat to this country is from within. Disloyal Americans, liberal, Marxist Democrats, leftists, and of course, immigrants. Immigrants in this country, illegally or legally. J.D. Vance said he doesn't care that the Haitians are in our country legally. He says, as far as I'm concerned, they're illegal aliens. And now Trump's using the big lie to steal the 2024 election, to try to steal the 2024 election. Now, he cannot win this. So he's using, once again, the big lie. The big lie this time is, I lost to Kamala Harris because millions and millions and millions, this is what he says, millions and millions and millions, the big lie, millions and millions and millions of migrants are being bussed into America, into key battleground states to vote for her. Okay? He said that in 2016. He said that about 2020, and he's saying it, this is what he's saying now. Voter fraud. This is the big lie. Voter fraud is a lie. And Americans, some Americans, too many Americans are willing to believe it so long as it's shrouded in a little racism. Sprinkle a little racism on the big lie, you can get enough Americans to believe it. Where did this big lie start? The voter fraud lie. The same guy who gave us the war in Iraq and Afghanistan also gave us voter fraud. The voter fraud lie began really under George W. Bush. It started with his political advisor, Karl Rove, and his willing accomplice, Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, who answered to Karl Rove. Rove, after the 2000 election, saw that Republicans cannot win at the ballot box. He knew after 2000 Bush lost the popular vote, and he knew when the votes were finally counted in Florida, George W. Bush also lost Florida. Had there been a recount, George W. Bush would have lost Florida. Karl Rove knew that. The Supreme Court blocked the recount in December of 2000. But a consortium of news organizations conducted their own recount and concluded by every standard, dimple chads, no dimple chads, every way to count votes, they concluded Al Gore won Florida statewide. Had there been a recount, had the Supreme Court not stopped the recount, Al Gore would have won Florida. That recount, conducted by a consortium of news organizations, including the Miami Herald, it was conducted a year after the court awarded the presidency to George W. Bush. It came a year after 9/11. A year after 9/11 turned George W. Bush into the most popular president in American history. His approval rating after 9/11 was in the 90s. No president ever got an approval rating in the 90s. And what did he do to earn an approval rating in the 90s? Ignore intelligence briefings that said Osama bin Laden intent on flying hijacked airliners into the World Trade Center. That's what earned him the high approval rating. By the time we learned that Bush would have lost Florida had the court allowed a recount, 9/11 had already made him the most popular president in American history. And nobody was going to report that. Nobody was going to report 2 months after 9/11 that George W. Bush was an illegitimate president, which he was. A legitimate war criminal, but an illegitimate president. Now, Karl Rove knew the Republican Party had a big problem after 2000, especially because of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It was getting easier and easier for black people to vote, which meant the Southern strategy, the Republican pivot to the old Confederacy starting in 1968, was going to crumble if black people, people of color, especially in marginalized communities, found it increasingly easier to vote in places like Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, Texas. Now, you have to remember, Republicans do not do well with people of color, especially people of color living in marginalized communities. Why is that? Because, in case you haven't noticed, Republicans persecute people of color, especially people of color living in marginalized communities, and they pick up on that. So, what do? You suppress the vote. This is called voter suppression, which is different from voter fraud. On today's show, you're going to learn, some of you might not know the difference between voter suppression and voter fraud. Republicans like to confuse the two. So, in order to suppress the vote, Republicans decided to tell a lie, a big lie, about something called voter fraud. But there is no voter fraud, especially since one of the results of the contested Bush v. Gore 2000 election was the federal government pumped billions of dollars into election integrity, making it nearly impossible for someone to register in two separate states without eventually getting caught. It got computerized. After 2000, it became next to impossible for someone to vote twice. There's no evidence of anybody. Chris Kobach from Kansas was appointed by Donald Trump to look into an election. Trump started an election fraud commission right after he became president, and it disbanded. They said, we can't find any voter fraud. Chris Kobach from Kansas, who was one of the big champions out there promoting voter fraud, given a chance to prove it, said, I can't do it. I can't find any voter fraud. None. Zero. After 2000, it became next to impossible for someone to vote twice, or even register to vote twice. Doesn't matter what the truth is. The bigger the lie, the better. And the new lie is non-citizens are voting. The new lie, migrants are coming over the border to vote. Okay? Millions and millions of migrants are coming over the border to vote. You would think there'd be one of them would have been arrested. One? You would think somebody would have noticed. Nobody is voting illegally in America. Nobody. But you say millions and millions and millions. It's the big lie. Let me go back to the origin story of voter fraud, which doesn't exist. Voter fraud is invented to justify voter suppression. Voter fraud doesn't exist. But Karl Rove and the Republicans needed the big lie to justify states, especially in the old Confederacy, to justify their passing voter ID laws, passing laws that make it hard, if not impossible, for people of color and marginalized communities to cast a ballot, because these people don't vote for Republicans. This is called voter suppression. Voter fraud doesn't exist. Voter suppression does. The people who want to suppress the vote, Republicans, created the lie, the big lie of voter fraud, to convince low information Americans we need to pass laws that require proof of residence for somebody to cast a ballot. Those laws are voter suppression, targeting people of color in marginalized community, because in case I haven't mentioned this, Republicans hate poor people and people of color. And they really hate poor people of color. And they don't want them to vote. Karl Rove realized that voter suppression is only possible if we can get the American people to believe the big lie that voter fraud exists. And how do you get Americans to believe the big lie? Bush's Attorney General, Alberto Gonzales, who just endorsed Kamala Harris, he was more than willing to assist in spreading the lie about voter fraud. Some of you are old enough to remember. Some of you are even old enough to forget that Karl Rove and Alberto Gonzales were accused of politicizing our Justice Department. And it was a little confusing back then. Nobody really knew. We just knew Karl Rove and Alberto Gonzales are politicizing our Justice Department. But nobody really understood what it was. On December 7th, 2006, Bush fired 7 U.S. attorneys. Why? 2 reasons. The most obvious one is he fired them because the U.S. attorneys refused to take orders from Karl Rove, who was the White House political director at the time. They refused to take Karl Rove's orders to prosecute his political enemies, like a Democratic state senator from New Mexico. Okay? But the other reason these 7 attorneys got fired is they wouldn't prosecute phony cases of voter fraud. Karl Rove said, we need to politicize this Justice Department and get them to start prosecuting voter fraud, cracking down on non-existent voter fraud to create the illusion that there's a problem in order to justify new laws that suppress the vote for people of color living in marginalized communities. Rove, Bush, Attorney General Alberto Gonzales knew that if the Justice Department began prosecuting fictitious voter fraud, those prosecutions, which they would lose, would still justify state legislators passing bills making it harder for people of color in marginalized communities to vote. That is what That big story was in 2006 about Karl Rove, Alberto Gonzales, and George W. Bush politicizing the Justice Department. I guarantee you 99.9% of Americans who were around back then can tell you that Karl Rove politicized the Justice Department, but nobody, because the press doesn't do its job, nobody knows it was primarily about creating the fiction of voter fraud. Voter ID laws that demand verification in order to vote, target people of color. They target people living in marginalized communities who move around a lot. These are the people who have difficulty proving where they live because they can't produce, for example, a water bill or a rental agreement. They might be able to produce a birth certificate, but that only proves you're born in America. How do you prove your residence? Especially if you don't have a driver's license and you're sleeping on your sister's couch, like me, after several of my divorces. How can I show proof of where exactly I lived in order to vote? I was living with my sister on her couch. Everything, the lease, where she was renting, her cable bill, the water bill, it was all in her name. How did I prove my residence when I went in to vote? I'm white. I registered using her address, and because I'm white and I live in New York, I voted. No questions asked. Now, if I decided to register using someone else's address because of the money pumped into election integrity after 2000, the computers would have caught that. Now, you can try, I don't recommend it, but you can try to register in two separate states. But eventually Ann Coulter, Steve Bannon, Jared Kushner, and Mark Meadows, they all got caught. And by the way, they were honest mistakes committed by dishonest people. People move. People live in New York, like Jared Kushner, and then they decide, I better move to Florida. So when they sue me, they can't get my retirement accounts. And he forgot to tell New York State, I don't live here anymore. It's an honest mistake. But you get caught doing it. Nobody is voting illegally in America. Nobody. Zero. Donald Trump, again, set up in 2017 a commission looking into voter fraud. They couldn't find any voter fraud. So, these voter ID laws are based on a lie. And they have allowed Republican-controlled state governments to scrub and continue to scrub millions of Americans, specifically people of color from marginalized communities, off our voting rolls. You might remember the scrubbing of black people from voter rolls had already begun in Florida. This was going on in the lead up to the election in Florida during the 2000 election. Jeb Bush, the governor of Florida and brother of George W. Bush, along with his Secretary of State, remember her, Catherine Harris? That's not Catherine Harris, is it? That's Kimberly Gargoyle, Don Jr.'s fiance. We punched in the wrong vampira from Florida. Let's get the other vampira from Florida. There she is, Katherine Harris, Florida's Secretary of State during the 2000 election. And just to show you how far we've come, I'm not making this up. Now take a look at her. Let me go big here. 24 years ago, this was considered way too much night makeup during the day. I'm absolutely serious. Tina Fey on Weekend Update was telling Katherine Harris to dial it back a little. Lay off the mascara. Okay? That was too much. Now this is considered normal. Even J.D. Vance is wearing eyeliner. Different times. J.D. Vance, who's complaining about the feminization of America, is wearing eyeliner. By the way, I alter pictures. That's a real picture of J.D. Vance. He's such a great guy, isn't he? So, Jeb Bush, governor of Florida, and Katherine Harris, the Secretary of State, who oversaw the election in Florida, Republican, they hired a company in the lead up to the 2000 election. It's a company out of Texas, and they were hired to scrub the Florida voting rolls in the name of election integrity. They wanted clean ballots, clean voter rolls for the 2000 election, because that's what brothers do for brothers. Katherine Harris and Jeb Bush got a list of any Floridian who served time or was serving time, anybody who had a prison record. And they specifically looked for anyone with a name like Roosevelt, Johnson, Martinez. They specifically looked for names that were common in the Black and Hispanic community. And using this Texas company, they scrubbed those names from the voting rolls. I wish I were making this up. Well, when your father was the head of the CIA, you learn how to steal elections. That's what the CIA does best. I'm sorry, I'm gulping coffee. Who do you think taught Jeb Bush how to scrub voting rolls? What happened on Election Day in 2000 in Florida, hundreds, thousands of black people named Roosevelt, or people of color named Gonzalez, they were told they couldn't vote because their name had been scrubbed from the voting rolls because of their prison record. And they said, but I don't have a prison record. And the election officials said, take it up with the courts. You can apply for a provisional ballot, but who has the time or the energy to do that? That's how Jeb Bush tried to fix the election in Florida for his brother in 2000. And despite that, George W. Bush lost Florida. Had the recount not been stopped by the Supreme Court, his war criminal brother, George W. Bush, would have lost. Scrubbing all those names, all those black names and Hispanic names. And there were other ways they scrubbed black people and Hispanics off the rolls. Despite all that, despite having your brother as the governor of Florida, he still lost. All we needed was a Supreme Court that would have allowed a recount. So what was the lesson Karl Rove learned from all this? That Bush learned from this? That the Republicans learned from this? They decided if we did all this work and Gore still won in Florida, we need to start scrubbing even harder. Because in order for the Republican Party to win elections, especially in the South, they have to do everything they can to keep people of color living in marginalized communities from voting. Because, in case I haven't mentioned this, people of color in marginalized communities don't vote for Republicans because, I don't know if you know this, Republicans are hateful bigots. Over the years, we see laws making it harder for these people to vote because Republicans, well, they trust Americans with a gun more than they do with an absentee ballot. And what this does is it makes our politics and then our government more racist and more dismissive of the needs of marginalized communities. Nobody talks about the poor in Congress. They talk about the effing middle class. There is no middle class in America. That's another fiction for another show. You're either rich or you're poor. Shut the F up about the middle class. I have a whole other program planned to show you there's no such thing as a middle class anymore. You're either rich or poor. A lot of Americans don't know they're poor because they don't open up when the credit card bill comes, they just ignore it. So the Republicans have pulled this off by convincing enough low information people that there's something called voter fraud. You can't have the voter suppression that they've deployed unless enough bigots go along with the lie of voter fraud. Republicans are terrified of democracy because they're terrified of voters. They screw over all the voters. You have to be incredibly ignorant and delusional or incredibly rich to vote for the Republicans, or a racist. And as we're once again being reminded, you'd be amazed how much you can get out of people by appealing to their racism. From Mein Kampf, tell a lie so big people assume nobody would be so impudent to say something like this if it weren't true. The voter fraud lie started with George W. Bush when he became president. Election integrity. We must protect our democracy in order to destroy it. In 2013, the Roberts Court, he was appointed by George W. Bush as Chief Justice. He also appointed Alito. The Roberts Court in 2013, 11 years ago, in Shelby County versus Holder, this was when Obama was president, they reversed key portions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And in this ruling, the court said that states from the old Confederacy, notorious for Jim Crow-era laws, making it impossible specifically for black people to vote, the court ruled, well, these states no longer needed pre-clearance from the Justice Department before passing new voting law legislation. So between the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and Shelby County versus Holder in 2013, states from the old Confederacy, and I think some counties in New York actually, could not change their voting laws unless those laws were approved by the Justice Department first. It's called pre-clearance, because these counties and these states could not be trusted to pass voting laws that did not discriminate specifically against black people. The Roberts Court ruled in Shelby versus Holder in 2013 that in the nearly 50 years since the Voting Rights Act of 65 was passed, and now, 2013, states from the old Confederacy no longer had any intention of making it difficult for black people to vote. Sure, they didn't. And right after that decision, right after these states from the old Confederacy no longer needed what is called pre-clearance from our Justice Department, every state from the old Confederacy, one by one, began passing incredibly restrictive voting laws, almost Jim Crow era voting laws that now make it easier to scrub people from the voting rolls and almost impossible for people to vote unless they can show proof of where they live. And that discriminates against people of color in marginalized communities. That was 2013. 3 years later, along comes Donald Trump, who, like George W. Bush in 2000, lost the popular vote. And he immediately launched into a newer and bigger lie. The Democrats are busing millions and millions and millions and millions of migrants over the border to vote for Hillary, to vote for Joe Biden in 2020. He continues to say this. Why? Well, two reasons. He needs an excuse to delegitimize any election he loses, and also to justify passing restrictive laws that make it even harder for people of color living in marginalized communities to vote. And now we're looking at a government shutdown on October 1st. Remember, the new budget starts each year on October 1st. We don't have a budget. We need what is called a continuing resolution. And we may be staring at a government shutdown because Donald Trump doesn't want Congress to pass a continuing resolution that would temporarily fund the government until they can get a budget together. He said, do not pass a continuing resolution unless you attach to that continuing resolution a bill called the SAVE Act, which Mike Johnson and Donald Trump came up with earlier in the year. The SAVE Act, and Mike Johnson's having trouble getting it passed, and it's never going to get passed, but here's why they're doing this. The SAVE Act would outlaw non-citizens from voting. Well, it's already against the law for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. Not only that, according to the Brennan Center, there's no example of, it's microscopic. You occasionally have immigrants who have been allowed, in New York, for example, some counties allow immigrants to vote even though they're not citizens. So occasionally some immigrants are confused and they get caught accidentally voting in a federal election. It cannot be measured. It's so microscopic. We're talking about out of 200 million votes cast, maybe 2 non-citizens have ever voted or tried to vote. They get caught. Since 2000, this government has spent billions to improve our elections. There's no evidence of non-citizens voting in any federal election, no voter fraud. But spread the big lie. Hitler, Joseph Goebbels. The bigger the lie, the more believable it is. It's counterintuitive, but it works if you sprinkle racism over it. So Donald Trump says he wants Congress to pass the SAVE Act. Okay, why? This is really important. It's kind of, it's evil, but it's ingenious. Okay, he wants to justify new laws making it harder for people of color living in marginalized communities to vote. We know that. That's the old playbook. That goes back to Karl Rove and George W. Bush. But Trump has taken it to a new level. He knows the SAVE Act is never going to get passed. And because it will never pass, it gives Trump license to spread the big lie that Democrats blocked passage of the SAVE Act so that millions and millions and millions of migrants, non-citizens, poured over the border on November 5th, were bussed into the country to vote for Kamala Harris, especially in the key battleground states that I lost. He's already planting the seeds for this. And you're seeing it play out with his getting the Democrats on record not allowing Mike Johnson to attach his SAVE Act to the continuing resolution in order to make them look, or in order to make Democrats look like they want millions and millions and millions of non-citizens to vote for Kamala Harris. But certainly nobody in America is going to believe a lie that big. Certainly nobody's going to believe Donald Trump when he says, I lost Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin because Democrats bussed in hundreds of thousands of migrants to vote for Kamala Harris. Nobody could possibly believe a lie of that enormity with zero evidence to back it up. It's too outrageous. Really? Go ask your liberal Democrat friend if the Taliban attacked us on 9/11. Ask yourself if you believe the Taliban attacked us on 9/11. Most of you believe that lie. Ask your Republican friend if cutting taxes for the very rich spurs so much economic growth the federal budget is automatically balanced from all the new income tax pouring in. Ask them if supply side economics works. Ask most of your friends, liberal, Democrat, Republican, conservative, if there's a crisis at the border. I say repeatedly on this show, there is no crisis at the border. And some of my listeners, really bright listeners, say, how can you say that? And I say, how can you believe that there's a crisis at the border? How can you believe this big lie? Most Americans believe there's a crisis at the border. Because most Americans don't know, no matter how much I tell them, because this is a tiny show, so nobody is told this. Most Americans don't know we need these migrants. This isn't me being a knee-jerk Jewish liberal from the west side of Manhattan living in a bubble, okay? We need these migrants for selfish reasons, okay? We are, believe it or not, an advanced country. And like all advanced countries, we're on the brink of a population implosion that will shrink our economy, leave millions of jobs unfilled, bankrupting Medicare and Social Security, and kicking out from under all the support beams propping up this glorified Ponzi scheme we call the U.S. economy. Those Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, are in this country legally. Why are they in this country legally. And what are they doing in Springfield, Ohio? Who asked them to go there? The business leaders of Springfield, Ohio. That's who. The government of Springfield, Ohio. They need those Haitians there to jumpstart the economy. The reason most Americans believe there's a migrant crisis is nobody except me is telling you about the thousands of small towns, the mid-sized towns all across America that don't have enough residents, towns that don't have enough workers, towns that are begging, literally begging for the migrants. Places like Topeka, Kansas, offering $15,000 to each migrant who has a work visa to move to Topeka, Kansas. Google Topeka, Kansas. Write in Topeka, Kansas offers $15,000 to any documented worker who can prove they have papers to move there. Indianapolis, Kentucky, these are red states. Alabama, Florida. There are towns in all these red states begging, offering thousands of dollars to anyone willing to move to their city, including migrants, if they have papers. It is why I say with supreme confidence and a shred of arrogance, there is no migrant crisis, and anyone who believes there's a migrant crisis is an ignoramus, isn't reading enough, isn't paying attention enough, which means you're an American, because they're just not reporting this. There is a crisis. What we have is an immigration policy crisis. We have a shortage of immigration judges because we're doing immigration on the cheap. We don't have enough administrative judges to process the migrants and get them where they are needed. Now, a problem is these migrants, well, they're not white. So while they're needed, they're also not wanted. Those Haitians in Springfield, Ohio are needed, but not wanted. At least not wanted by Republicans. Although Governor DeWine of Ohio is a Republican, and he's telling J.D. Vance, knock it off. We need these Haitians to keep coming here. They're propping up our economy. See, the cameras are on the border. Trump is very good. The Republicans are very good at framing imaginary crises. And as long as the cameras are on the border, that allows racists, and I do mean racists, like J.D. Vance, who has proven himself a full-throated racist, and Donald Trump. It has allowed them to control this issue. When there is no crisis, it's why Donald Trump said, kill the border bill back in February. Don't pass any legislation. What are you doing? I'm running on this fiction. The cameras need to be on the thousands of cities in America that can't survive because they're turning into ghost towns. The crisis isn't the migrants. They're the solution. And I'm not saying this because I'm a knee-jerk leftist. I'm saying this because we need to save capitalism. We need to save our government. We need to save our social safety net. Medicare, Social Security. This entire economy will go under if our population doesn't grow. It's estimated we're about 5 million short right now. We need 5 million more people right now. That's a given. The problem is these migrants aren't white. They're not white. But you know who gets this, who understands why you need migrants? The country that gave us Hitler. Germany took in the Syrian migrants more than a decade ago because Angela Merkel saw the writing on the wall. Germany didn't have enough people to prop up the economy, to prop up their social safety net. Now, some of you are going to write and go, well, there's tension between racism doesn't disappear. Old habits, hard to kick old habits. But the Syrian migrants, no matter how much the racists and the bigots, and they're growing in Germany, complain that they're a drain on the social safety net. No, they work. They contribute to the social safety net. They contribute whether or not they're citizens. The migrants pay into Social Security here in America. They don't get to collect it, but they get to pay. Their money is taken out of their paycheck to cover Social Security and Medicare and unemployment insurance. I know they pay into Social Security. Most Americans continue to believe the big lie, no matter how unbelievable it is, so long as they want to believe it. So if you slather a little patina of racism on it, enough Americans are willing to believe the big lie because they want to. They want to believe it. Racism. It is very stubborn. It is a stubborn stain. It is why Republicans vote against their own interests. Racism. Hard to believe. Hard to believe. Professor Harvey J.K. Taught me that we almost had something resembling single payer when Truman was president, because England was going with something like single payer, but the Southern Democrats said, we don't want black people going to the same hospitals as us. Ronald Reagan convinced enough Americans that per capita, more black people were on welfare than white people. That was a lie, but he spread the lie about the welfare queen. And enough people believed it because they wanted to believe it, and they still believe it. They still believe that more black people per capita are on welfare than white people. And because white people believe this lie, Republicans have launched a 50-year war on the social safety net that continues to this day, rooted in racism, rooted in the lie that black people are benefiting from welfare, when in fact it's per capita more white people. Hillbilly elegy. What's the matter with Appalachia? Well, J.D. Vance and dumb white people who don't pay taxes but insist they don't want their tax dollars going to lazy black people. Racism, this country, and we're seeing it right out front now. It's more important than climate catastrophe. People care more about their black neighbor having more. White people care more about their black neighbor having a nicer car than the oil companies killing us. So who benefits? Cui bono? Who benefits from racism? race, anyway, that's why race was invented. It's a conceit. It's an invention to justify the oppression of the 99%. Nixon convinced enough Americans that per capita, more black people were taking illegal drugs than white people. A lie. But enough people believed that lie, wanted to believe that lie, to give him permission to launch a war on drugs, filling our prisons and jails with a disproportionate number of black people, Hispanic people. It is a war on drugs that continues to this day. It wasn't until recently that sentencing guidelines for crack cocaine were harsher than ordinary cocaine because people of color were more likely to smoke crack cocaine than snort cocaine. So they had harsher sentencing guidelines for the drug of choice in the black community. When a lie is shrouded in racism, the willingness to accept that lie gets as big, if not bigger, than the lie itself, which means you got to give them bigger and bigger lies. It's why we've reached an inflection point with Donald Trump and the Republican Party. It's a lot different now with Trump because, again, the willingness to accept a lie becomes bigger than the lie itself. So if you have to tell big lies, then the lies have to get bigger, bigger, and bigger. Oh, what a web we weave when we something to deceive. So we've reached an inflection point. With Trump and the Republicans, you're now either a white Christian heterosexual male born here with two parents born here, or you are the enemy within poisoning our blood. It is not just the Haitians eating our pets. It's gay people grooming our children. During the debate, Donald Trump said, kids are going off to school and coming home a different sex. He said it during the debate. These kids, they go off to school, they kiss their mommy and daddy goodbye, and they come back, and they're having sex changes forced on them. And since Trump and people like Ron DeSantis, Huckabee, who's making fun of Kamala Harris for not having children, since this iteration of the Republican Party has taken over, there are laws on the books in places like Florida, rooted in the libel that gay people are going to groom children, that transgender men are going to rape women in bathrooms, that kids are going to leave home, go to school, and come back a different sex. He said it during the debate. He says it at his rallies. There is now, because of Donald Trump, state-sanctioned violence against the LGBTQ community. There's state-sanctioned violence against people of color, from how they're policed to how they're prevented from voting. There is state-sanctioned violence thanks to Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. There is state-sanctioned violence towards women forbidding them from seeking medical care, bleeding out when they're pregnant. These abortion laws are state-sanctioned violence against women to control them and to punish them for having sex. I went over the polling yesterday. When you poll these Republicans, they believe this is the final battle between good and evil. They believe the LGBTQ community is evil. They believe women who have sex before they're married, women who have sex for pleasure instead of procreation, are evil. They believe people of color are being shipped into this country to replace white people. I went over the numbers with you yesterday. It's staggering. These Republicans believe this. They believe this is the final battle between good and evil. And it's not only okay to lie when it's the final battle between good and evil. It's okay to resort to violence. They believe this. A majority of them believe this. Can you imagine any lie bigger than Democrats executing babies? Donald Trump says this repeatedly, even in the debates. He says Democrats are executing babies in the 8th and 9th month. He literally says that. He says the baby... I'm like afraid to repeat this. It's so offensive. Donald Trump says in the debates, in public, Democrats are executing babies in the 8th and 9th month. He says the baby is born, put on the operating table, and then the mother and doctor decide then and there whether to execute it. He's not saying Democrats want to pass laws that would make it easier or could lead to the execution of babies. He's saying Democrats are executing babies. These lies, he read Mein Kampf. This picture here of him he's not holding up a Bible. He keeps Mein Kampf on his bedstand. He gets it. The lies have to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Otherwise, nobody will believe them. Go ask your friends who are voting for this monstrosity whether or not they believe Democrats are executing babies. Have you ever heard a lie more outrageous than this? Well, get ready for October. If I got into a time machine and told Hitler that someone in America, 2024, is running for president, claiming that his opponent and the people who are voting for his opponent are executing babies, if I told that to Hitler, the first thing Hitler would say is, Feldman, that's a Jewish name, isn't it? And then I'd have a panic attack because it's fight or flight, and I want to kill Hitler. I got into a time machine, but it's not baby Hitler. I didn't go back far enough in time to kill baby Hitler. It's adult Hitler. And the rules are you can only use your time machine to kill baby Hitler. We do execute babies. I would execute baby Hitler. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. It's going to get pretty bad. It's going to get bad. He's going to lose. He will not admit he's going to lose. He's not going to admit that he lost. Get ready for the big lie. Millions and millions and millions of migrants have been shipped over the border to vote for Kamala Harris. If you think he's not going to do that, if he says Democrats are executing babies, there's almost something sweet about him saying we're bringing in millions and millions of migrants to vote for Kamala Harris. It sounds so anodyne and innocent. Luckily, I spoke to two constitutional scholars who say by the time Kamala Harris is sworn in, Donald Trump will have committed so many brand new crimes as a ex-president, we won't need to prosecute him for 2020. Jack Smith will be able to say, keep your immunity ruling, Supreme Court. All these crimes were committed without any presidential immunity. But he's dangerous. And the people who vote for him are dangerous. We used to say, can it happen here? It's happened here. It's happened. It's happened here. Ask black people. Ask Hispanics. Ask the Asians. People go, can it happen here? What the F are you talking about? It's happened since we were founded as a nation. What are you doing to stop this? What are you doing to save your country from this monster and the people who vote for him? What are you doing? Are you going to work for John Tester? Are you trying to save the Senate? Or are you just going to be a victim and say, I have no control over my destiny. What will be, will be. Que sera, sera. Are you going to defend and protect your country from the fascists the way my father did? This has been the mop-up for September 19th, 2024. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for finding me. We're going to do a vice president debate watch party on October 1st. It's literally going to be the battle between good and evil. They are right. This is a battle between good and evil. They just don't know who the evil one is. J.D. Vance. So we're going to watch Coach Walls. And I'll give you more information. Check out shopdavidfeldman.com. We have some magnificent garbage, new garbage over at Shop David Feldman that you should not waste your money on. The Still a Democrat t-shirt, the MAGA hats that I've printed up. You know, you got to buy gifts for your MAGA moron friends. So these are some MAGA hats. This is just a plain old MAGA hat for your MAGA moron friend. And then on the back, it says low IQ individual. But, you know, he can barely read MAGA. He certainly is not going to be able to see low IQ individual. He won't even know what that means. I like MAGA for Kamala, sorry, and MAGA moron. I actually think you could sell these to MAGA morons, though they'll wear it proudly. And, of course, the worst-case scenario map that I made for my sister. It's the map showing that it's impossible for Kamala Harris to lose. How Donald Trump sees himself on this mug. He's the king. He's Genghis Khan, C-O-N. I like that. With almost 30 credible sexual assault allegations, who wouldn't want this cup? Donald Trump as the predator. And I personally love this cup. It's Donald Trump in Edvard Munch's The Scream. I put this through the dishwasher every day, and it just, I don't know what kind of ink they're using, but it's beautiful. It really is. It's, and if you have a MAGA moron friend who is voting for Trump, the Trump 2028 cup, and my nephew, how many more of these? The David Ferdman Show stuff, still a Democrat, coffee mug. Is anybody still here? Made in Los Estados Unidos coffee mug. Don't go to a Trump rally without a fart filtration, an official Donald Trump fart filtration mask. And my biggest seller, the chef's apron with the words, I hope you're in the mood for diarrhea. Thank you to Bob in the chat room. Thank you to Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. I read all your comments. Please leave a comment. Please share this episode. I'm probably maybe going to do a short show at 2:30 a.m. tomorrow. I'm trying to do more shows at 2:30 a.m., as many as possible. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you. I think that covers everything. Please share this. That's the best way to help me. Thank you, everybody.